Unless you've been living underneath a rock, you most likely know about the multiverse, the newest trend that movies are following right now. The idea that there are different universes out there, infinite universes that contain all kinds of differences from the universe that we live in. The trend of multiverse movies started in 2018 with Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. However, I'd say it wasn't until Spider-Man No Way Home in 2021 where multiverse movies became what they are now. And even though the multiverse trend is still fairly recent, it has already run its course. It already feels boring. It already feels dull. We just want there to be something new now with movies and whatnot. Just ignore the multiverse. It has become a tiring subject. Of course, there are exceptions to this. The Spider-Verse movies, Everything Everywhere All at Once, and even though it kind of is part of the problem, Spider-Man No Way Home are all great movies, even if they are multiverse movies. There's a reason why these are exceptions to a lot of the stuff that I'm going to be talking about in this video, but I'll go into why they're exceptions later on into the video. This video will mainly focus on the MCU, the multiverse saga, if you will, which consists of everything from Phase 4 to Phase 6, in which we're currently in Phase 5. I'm also going to be briefly talking about the Flash movie that came out earlier this year, which also tackles the multiverse. Yes, I know the Flash is a DC movie, but it still counts. There are still problems with this whole multiverse thing that need to be discussed, and the Flash has a few perfect examples of what I'm trying to talk about here, what I want to talk about here. So without further ado, allow me to talk about the multiverse, the trend of multiverse movies and why they have already become burnt out. If you enjoyed this video, then be sure to like, and if you're new to the channel, maybe consider subscribing, as it would be greatly appreciated. With that said, let us dive in. 2021's Spider-Man No Way Home was a big movie for the MCU, as it did something that it had never done before. It brought in characters, versions of characters, from non-MCU Marvel movies. I am of course talking about the previous versions of Spider-Man. You have Tobey Maguire, who originally played Spider-Man in a trilogy of movies released between 2002 and 2007, and Andrew Garfield, who played Spider-Man in a duology of movies that came out in 2012 and 2014. This was the first time either one reprised their role as Spider-Man in a film, and it was something that a lot of people had wanted to see for a lot of reasons. For one thing, both of them had cancelled sequels that never got made. Tobey Maguire's version of Spider-Man was supposed to get a Spider-Man 4 released in 2011, but it ended up getting cancelled. Andrew Garfield's version of Spider-Man was also supposed to get a movie, The Amazing Spider-Man 3, but that also ended up being cancelled as well. So for a lot of people, it felt good. It felt nostalgic seeing these early previous versions of Spider-Man finally reprise their role. There's also the hard-to-ignore fan service of seeing the 3 different cinematic versions of Spider-Man all together. It was a great idea. It worked for a lot of reasons, and if this was just like a one-time thing, then it would be fine. There would be no problems at all, you know? We cannot have too much of a good thing, you know? I'm sure this whole thing of bringing in non-MCU Marvel movie characters into the MCU, I'm sure it's just a one-time thing that'll only happen with Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield's versions of Spider-Man, right? Right? Oh, of course not. Now, I'm not saying that Spider-Man No Way Home is single-handedly responsible for this. I'm not saying this. I'm sure that all the stuff following No Way Home was planned long before, but I cannot deny the impact this movie had on the MCU and possibly superhero movies as a whole. In the next MCU movie following No Way Home, Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, we have Patrick Stewart reprising his role as Professor X from the Fox X-Men movies. He's also barely in the movie, and he like essentially serves no purpose. Like, you could cut him out of the movie and like f***ing nothing would change at all. He's only in it as like a cheap nostalgia cameo, and that's it. Now, this isn't Patrick Stewart's fault. It's not me saying like, oh, he's bad or anything like that. It is not his fault at all. But like, what worked with Toby and Andrew in No Way Home, it doesn't work for Patrick in Multiverse of Madness. And I get that these are different because, you know, the former is a main, like, important thing for a movie, and the latter is just a little cameo to make fans happy. But that's the thing, because the trailers for Multiverse of Madness included Patrick Stewart in it. It included Professor X in it, and it made you think that he was going to play an important part in the movie. It made you think that the other X-Men would appear, like, you know, Hugh Jackman as Wolverine and whatnot. It made you think that they were going to reprise their roles as well, and then the X-Men would officially join the MCU. And that ended up not happening at all. Despite the trailers for the movie making it seem like Professor X and the potential X-Men, if they were to appear, would have a big role in the movie, that ended up not happening at all. It's just cheap nostalgia, false advertising, and that's it. Of course, though, the X-Men are going to be in the MCU, essentially. With Patrick Stewart's appearance, with Professor X's appearance, I don't know why I keep saying the name of the actor and not the character that they play. I'm sorry for that. With Professor X's appearance, by default, the X-Men is already part of the MCU now. Just like that. But now you have Deadpool 3 that's part of the MCU. And not only does it have Ryan Reynolds reprising the role of Deadpool, but you also got Hugh Jackman reprising the role as Wolverine. I kind of don't want this to happen simply because they're retconning the, you know, conclusion that Wolverine had in Logan, his death in Logan. It was an emotional scene, and they're just going to ruin that now for cheap nostalgia, basically. Yeah, it's great that he's come back to reprise the role, but this just makes his death in Logan really pointless. And I could be wrong on this, but I think there's another non-MCU Marvel movie character that's going to appear in Deadpool 3. I could be wrong on that, but if there is, then that's gonna add into another problem that I gotta bring up later on into this video. And as if that wasn't enough, the DCEU, the MCU's rivals, the roller coaster of ups and downs, joined in on this multiverse stuff very briefly. Considering the fact that Aquaman 2 is slated to be the final DCEU movie, and I have no idea if James Gunn's reboot of the DC universe is gonna have any multiverse bullcrap in it. Most likely it will, but you never know. Yeah, for the time being, I'm just gonna say this is the only attempt at a multiverse, like, thing from the DCEU. The Flash features the return of Michael Keaton as Batman. Now, Michael Keaton previously played Batman in the two Tim Burton Batman movies, Batman from 1989 and Batman Returns from 1992. And listen, Michael Keaton was really good in this movie. He was honestly the saving grace of this film. Michael Keaton's back must have hurt from carrying this film, seriously. But this was so obviously done because of Toby and Andrew's return in No Way Home. There was no other reason as to why they would bring back Michael Keaton. Of course, though, that pales in comparison with a really big problem that is featured in The Flash that I will talk about later on. And I'm honestly worried that the more multiverse movies we get, the more common of a problem this will become. So just hold on a bit. Just sit back, relax, and let me explain the problems I have with these multiverse movies. So for starters, let me just exclusively focus with the MCU, because this isn't as big of a problem for The Flash compared to with the MCU. If the DCEU was still going on, then yeah, this would be a bigger problem. However, because the DCEU is ending with Aquaman 2, this is not a problem at all. So there's no point in adding it into the equation. A common criticism that many people have about the MCU nowadays, and it is a problem that I have with it as well as a former fan, is that the MCU has become very fucking bloated and overloaded. There are way too many movies coming out, way too many Disney Plus shows, and it's exhausting trying to keep up with everything that you have to sit through in order to understand what happens in these movies. At the time of making this video, there are 33 MCU movies, and there are, I don't know exactly how many there are, but there's at least 10 Disney Plus shows. It's a lot of stuff to sit through. This is a key factor in the burnout that people are feeling with superhero stuff and the MCU and whatnot. Superhero fatigue, as they call it. And something that I'm surprised not a lot of people bring up when talking about how the MCU isn't good anymore is the fact that it is now even more bloated than it already was because of the multiverse stuff. Alright, let's do the math. Currently, there are 33 movies in the MCU. But because of No Way Home, you have to watch both the Sam Raimi Spider-Man trilogy and the Amazing Spider-Man duology, which are 5 movies. So that's 38 movies in total that you gotta watch now. Because if you don't watch these movies before watching No Way Home, you're not going to understand what's happening in No Way Home. Actually, I forgot as well, in the post-credits scene for No Way Home, there's a cameo appearance from Eddie and Venom from the Sony, I don't know what's called, the Sonyverse or something like that. But it's where like Venom and Morbius and all that stuff is from. So you gotta add those movies in. Currently there are 3 movies, but you know for a fact they're gonna make more of these movies. So now we have 41 movies to sit through. And then, because of all the X-Men stuff that has become part of the MCU, mainly, you know, Professor X's appearance in Multiverse of Madness, just to make things easier, just to give like one example, you have to sit through all 13 X-Men movies as well. Yes, 13 movies. And so, in total, you now have to sit through 54 movies in order to understand what is happening in the MCU. That is unbelievable. The whole thing of bringing in non-MCU Marvel characters into the MCU, it should have just been with Tobey and Andrew in No Way Home, and that's it. Just have it be a one-time, one-and-done thing. Because if you keep doing it over and over and over again, not only will the novelty of it wear off, but it will also make the MCU even more hard to sit through, even more hard to follow. Funny story, in Multiverse of Madness, yeah, I keep bringing this one a lot. This one, I think, this and The Flash, I think, exemplify all the problems I have with multiverse movies. It's crazy. There's an appearance from Mr. Fantastic. Now, I didn't know this at the time in the theaters, but this is a new version of Mr. Fantastic that was never seen before in any of the previous Fantastic Four movies. I didn't know that at the time, because I have never seen any of the Fantastic Four movies. I didn't know if this version of Mr. Fantastic was from the unreleased 1994 movie, or the mid to late 2000s movies, or that really bad 2015 movie. I didn't know at all. Imagine my relief when I found out that this was a new version that was not from any of the previous Fantastic Four movies. I mean, yeah, you could say it wouldn't make sense for the MCU to put in a movie that was never released, or a movie that has gotten a large amount of hate, but, you know, still, I didn't know that at the time, and I was worried. That's the effect that this could have on you. If you see a character, you're not going to know, is it going to be like, okay, is this a new version of that character, or is this a character from, like, a previously established version? Like, you're not gonna know. The only way you would know is if by some chance you had already watched the movies before. Like, if I had watched the Fantastic Four movies, the 4 of them, funny, I know, before watching Multiverse of Madness. But, like, there was no indication of that at all, that a version of Mr. Fantastic would appear in the movie. And it seems like it's just never gonna end. The more MCU movies come out, it's just like, it's just getting like boring, you know? The fun and novelty of seeing Tobey and Andrew return in No Way Home, that's been just completely ruined now, immediately. Now this is the part where I want to briefly talk about The Flash, because even though The Flash isn't really part of this problem now, it's part of another big problem, a big concern of mine that I have with multiverse movies. Now, as stated before, Michael Keaton returns to play Batman in The Flash. And I cannot believe I am praising The Flash for doing this. The Flash is a terrible movie, don't get me wrong, but you don't really have to watch the Michael Keaton Batman movies in order to understand his role in The Flash. I have not seen the Michael Keaton Batman movies. I'm sure they're really good movies, but I've never seen them. So thankfully I was able to understand this version of the character without needing to watch the movies that he was from. So yeah, I just want to give a very, 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 very little bit of credit to The Flash. However, The Flash does something that is so much worse in every possible way, and it just goes to show that, you know, multiverse stuff can actually be really f***ing bad for a lot of reasons. At this point, I feel like having these other characters appear in the MCU and whatnot in the DCEU, at this point now it's just more just because of nostalgia, and that's it, you know? People have nostalgia for the X-Men movies. Put Professor X into Multiverse of Madness. People have nostalgia for the Michael Keaton Batman movies. Put Michael Keaton into The Flash, that sort of thing. Rather than like doing anything interesting with these characters, giving them some sort of like conclusive arc or anything like that, it's just they're in it for cheap nostalgia, and that's it. They're in it just so that, you know, the average nerd will go and look at, like, they'll be like, oh my gosh, guys, it's the old version of that character. I understand that. That's a cool reference. Wow. I say this a lot in my videos, but I'm gonna say it again. Nostalgia sells. It makes money. It makes some serious money. And now this is the part where that can lead to some pretty dark stuff. Near the end of The Flash, there's a scene where different versions of DC characters from like older movie versions and whatnot, way before the DCEU, appear. Among these are Christopher Reeves as Superman and Adam West as Batman. Here's the problem. Christopher Reeves died in 2004. Adam West died in 2017. The Flash came out in 2023. So basically what happened is, using Christopher Reeves as an example, they basically just took Christopher Reeves, they made a CGI replica of Christopher Reeves, and they just shoehorned it into the movie just for cheap nostalgia. They took a person who is f***ing dead. A person, like, he did not consent. Christopher Reeves did not consent to his likeness being included in this movie, and he cannot consent because he's been dead for almost 20 years. There's literally nothing he can do. If they just reused footage from, like, Superman 1978, and, like, that would be fine. I would be okay with that. I'm sure we could agree that would be less tasteless. That would be less disrespectful. But this is just gross, for real. They did the same thing as well with another actor that played Superman. Now, I don't know the actor's name, but I remember reading something that apparently this specific actor that played Superman, he hated playing Superman. He hated the fact that Superman was basically the only thing he was known for. He couldn't get any other roles at all because people only knew him as the guy who played Superman, and that's it. And it got to a point where he ended up committing because of this. Superman ruined his life basically, and they just put this CGI version of him into this movie without his consent or of anything like that, and they just didn't think of it at all. Like, it's just, I don't get it at all. Like, why would you do that? That's not even funny. Like, that's just f***ed up, seriously. And this was like going around the time when like the strikes were going on, you know, the actors and writer strikes and going on, and one of the biggest concerns they had was the use of like AI and whatnot in films, replacing, you know, human artists, you know, actual actors and writers and stuff, instead of just using AI for everything. And this isn't even like exclusively multiverse related at all. This is just for like in general, like just don't use CGI to bring back, you know, deceased actors. Like, imagine if, like, for Black Panther, for, like, Wakanda Forever, imagine if instead, or, like, for a potential Black Panther 3, if they were to make one, imagine if they just went ahead and they used, like, a CGI replica of Chadwick Boseman, and they used, like, an AI voice thing for him. Like, is that not f***ed up to you? Is that not disrespectful? Imagine if they used it for Stan Lee, bro. Imagine if they did that. They use, like, you know, they use CGI. They CGI him into cameos. They use CGI cameos for him. And if he speaks, they just use an AI voice thing, and that's it. Like, what the f***, man? That's disgusting, seriously. You know, for the most part, this video is just like, you know, like, okay, sure, like, okay, sure, you know, I understand being frustrated, but this doesn't matter. But then, like, this actually pisses me off, because it's something that could potentially become a bigger thing. This idea of using CGI to bring back deceased actors. They cannot consent to their likeness being in the movie. Again, this wouldn't be bad if they just reused footage. Like, they could have just reused footage from Superman 1978 or whatever for Christopher Reeves, instead of using CGI. Like, that's just in poor taste, seriously. To move things to a considerably more positive note, during this scene in The Flash, there's a reference to the infamous unreleased Superman Lives. At one point in time, Nicolas Cage was going to play Superman. However, the movie ended up never happening, and it has become one of the biggest what-ifs in superhero movie history, arguably film history as a whole. What if Nicolas Cage did play Superman? And yeah, this is a CGI version of Nicolas Cage. It does look terrible, much like the rest of the CGI in The Flash, but you know what? This is fine. I'm okay with this, because Nicolas Cage is still alive, so instead of just coming off as being, like, disrespectful, this is instead a fun little Easter egg that, like, only, like, comic book nerds, people that are really into superhero movies would know. This isn't disrespectful at all. I'm perfectly fine with this. And because Nicolas Cage is still alive, he most likely gave his consent to have his likeness be used in this movie, so that's why. It's fine. I'm okay with this. But you cannot do this for, like, Adam West as Batman, because Adam West died in 2017. He cannot consent to his likeness being used in this. I'm sorry. I'm honestly hoping that this ends up being a one-time thing, but I mean, to be fair, the idea of non-MCU Marvel movie characters joining the MCU, people thought would just be a one-time thing with only Tobey and Andrew Spider-Man, and look at where we're at now. Look at where we're at now. So I wouldn't be surprised if this ends up becoming a bigger trend. I wouldn't be surprised in the slightest. Now, to wrap up this video, I'm going to be going over the 4 exceptions to the multiverse movies problem. I'm going to explain briefly why these movies work when it comes to tackling the multiverse. Spider-Man No Way Home is an exception to this, because even though it started this problem of just relying on nostalgia, bringing back old versions of superhero movie characters and whatnot, it was the first to do it, so therefore it gets a pass, because at least this was before it became stale and overdone. It still felt fresh when No Way Home did it. And yes, this is fan service, I won't deny it, but you know what? At least there's passion put into this. At least you could tell there was some form of care, some form of heart put into this, having Tobey Maguire, Andrew Garfield, and Tom Holland all together as their respective versions of Spider-Man. There's a huge difference between this versus the Professor X cameo from Multiverse of Madness, or especially the disrespecting of, like, Christopher Reeve and Adam West and George Reeves, yes, I managed to remember his name, in The Flash. There's a huge difference between this. I've said it before and I'll say it again. If this whole trend of, you know, bringing back old superhero movie characters, if it began and ended with Spider-Man No Way Home, there would be no problem at all. No problem at all. What started off as a fun, cute novelty, seeing the 3 different versions of Spider-Man all together in one movie, it very quickly devolved into this crap. So, yeah. Everything Everywhere All at Once gets a pass for this because, number one, it is an original story. It's not a superhero movie or anything like that. It's not part of some established franchise. It's nothing like that. And number two, it is a one-and-done thing. I am 99% sure that this movie is not going to get a sequel. It'll just be a standalone solo movie, which makes it easy to rewatch it again and again. Because at least it's not like you gotta watch a million movies in order to understand what happens in this one. And finally, the Spider-Verse movies are an exception to this because, number one, Into the Spider-Verse started this whole multiverse trend. No Way Home popularized the idea of bringing back older superhero movie characters into, like, current day superhero movies. However, Spider-Verse was the one that started the whole trend of multiverse movies. And it actually does it in a unique way. They could go the cheap way. They could go the lazy way. They could bring in characters from previous Spider-Man movies into Spider-Verse, but they choose not to. The way the multiverse works in the Spider-Verse movies, they're done in a unique, original way. It's not like, oh, look at these characters, look at cameos, guys, references to old movies, guys, that's so crazy. Here's a character from an old movie, and there's going to be important references to the movie that he was in, and if you've never watched the movie that he was in, then you're f***ed beyond belief. No, there is nothing like that at all. It's honestly a shame because the multiverse does have the potential to be an interesting idea for movies now, for superhero movies and whatnot, and now it's just being used as just nostalgia bait, basically. Bringing back old versions of like superhero movie characters just for cheap nostalgia, and that's it. And unfortunately, it seems like it'll only get worse and worse as it goes on, so you know what, at least we can appreciate these 4 movies. The whole thing with the multiverse, it was fun while it lasted, but unfortunately, nothing lasts forever. Anyways, that's about it. I just wanted to make a video talking about the whole multiverse stuff and my numerous problems with it. If you enjoyed this video, then be sure to like, and if you're new to the channel, maybe consider subscribing, as it would be greatly appreciated. Thank you everyone for watching this video, and I will see you all next time. Adios.